The CFP rankings are here. The 12-team playoff is finally set. We know what the matchups are. We know who are getting the top 4 buys. And we also know of some potential matchups we may have here in the next couple weeks after the first round. So we had our conference championships, and we'll get into those a little bit later, and we'll just talk about this right now. But the 12-team rankings, they go as follows. And I got my little bracket here pulled up, ready to go, and talking about it. But, of course, we got Oregon as that 1 seed. We got Georgia, the SEC champions, as the 2 seed. Boise State, the Mountain West champions, as a 3 seed. And then Arizona State, it's just an incredible story for them, as the 4th seed. And then after that, the 5-12 matchup, we got Texas and Clemson. We got Penn State and SMU as the 6-11 matchup. And Clemson being the ACC champion, they're at 12. SMU, the runner-up, is at 11. So I find that really noteworthy right there, that the runner-up is ranked higher. Then it's 7-10 matchup. We have Notre Dame and Indiana. The battle for Indiana, I guess you can call it, is going to take place here in a couple weeks. And then the 8-9 matchup is Ohio State and Tennessee. So that's where we're left off. And, of course, Alabama, first team out, they are going to be playing in the ReliaQuest Bowl against Michigan. So, I mean, I'm happy about it. I was a little bit worried, I guess you can say, about what was going to happen there, because that final spot was up for grabs. And I do wonder if that Clemson SMU game, if Clemson had not won by only a field goal in SMU and not fought its way back to make it in that situation, would they have been left out and Bama was just like, okay, we're taking Bama? I wonder if, it's an Elseworld scenario, but you wonder about that. So Alabama's left out and SMU gets in. And I think that was the big conversation that we would have, I think, with these rankings, because I feel like we pretty much knew what was going to happen. And, we had most of these teams. We knew who most of them were going to be in this bracket. So it was like, it's just a matter of who gets that final spot, because that's a big talking point. And so SMU and Alabama, they were up for it. SMU gets the nod. And now you have this whole conversation happen afterwards, after the fact, where you have SMU, whose strength of schedule is lower compared to Alabama. Their resume is not as great as Alabama. They get the nod. And now you have this conversation of, well, does playing big out-of-conference games matters anymore? Does it really matter? And so now you have that whole conversation is like, well, we can just schedule, this scrub, and this scrub, and we can be fine, because we know in the future that we'll be fine. Strength of schedule doesn't matter because SMU got in. That's going to be the conversation that's going to be had here. And it does. I feel like there might be some that are wondering, is this more of about who's deserving and who's the best? And, I think that's definitely a conversation. But I will say, with Alabama, is the resume better? Yes. But they did lose to 2 6-6 teams. They lost at Vanderbilt. They got crushed by double digits at Oklahoma. You cannot do that. Only one of those, I think, you would be fine. But you had 2 of those. And the Oklahoma one was kind of startling, because Oklahoma was not really all that good this year. Yes, they're 6-6 and they're going bowling, but only their defense was the standout for them. So I think if you take a look at that, listen, the losses for Alabama were just too much, I think, at that point. You lose to Oklahoma like that on the road. You lose to Vanderbilt. I think it's a little bit too much. And despite SMU, who, they didn't play tough competition in the ACC. That's just the way their schedule kind of drew. with a lot of the teams at the bottom, teams that they played. And they did lose to the two ranked teams that they were scheduled to play. They lost to BYU, they lost to Clemson. But I think you take a look at SMU's body of work. They were really close to winning that game. If that field goal doesn't happen, then we're talking about overtime. SMU fought their way back, and you're like, SMU's got some momentum here in overtime. So this conversation is going to be had here for the course of the playoff, for the off season, heading into next season. It's going to be had, and a lot of Bama fans are mad, and there's a lot of other fans that are probably like wondering, okay, why is SMU in here? But this is just what we got, and now we have this conversation of, is out of conference, does that matter? And I know the Alabama AD Burn had a lengthy thing about it on Twitter. But I will say, with Alabama, their losses were in conference. So the out of conference was not a problem for them. If you want to be in, don't lose to Vandy, don't lose to Oklahoma like you did. Don't do it. Play better on the road in those environments. So I kind of take a look at that as like, okay, well, SMU, I feel like it might have just been they were really close to beating Clemson there, if not for that long field goal right there. So they get the nod, and they are slotted at 11 to go to Penn State for that game. And just kind of taking a look at these games, I think right away, the first look at it, the teams that have the toughest draw, I think, are Oregon, Ohio State, and Tennessee. And here's why. I think you take a look at that Ohio State-Tennessee matchup. It's a tough draw because you're playing really good competition there, really strong team up front on both sides. It's going to be a tough physical matchup in the cold at Columbus. And those two teams, they've had their glitches, but at times it look like contenders. And then you take a look at Oregon, they got to face the winner of that matchup right there. Now they have a bye and they can rest a little, but they got to face the winner of that matchup. And it goes into, I think, a larger conversation with the playoff right now and what are some changes that can be done to kind of better it. And reseeding is one of those things. We know the NFL does it every time in the postseason, in which the lowest seed goes and plays the top remaining seed. The lowest remaining seed goes and plays the highest remaining seed, and then the highest remaining seed goes and play the second highest remaining seed. So that's kind of the way I feel like if that's the case, then you take a look at, say Indiana is the highest seed, that lowest rated seed that wins in round one. They go and play Oregon. I think that makes a whole lot better sense right there, and just reseeing the whole thing. And also the buys, I'm not really sure about that because I know people are up in arms about Boise State getting a bye and all that, and maybe it should just be the four best. But I think the reseeding is something that definitely needs to be reconsidered here, because now if you're Oregon, you're a conference champion, you're undefeated, and your reward, you got to play Ohio State or Tennessee in round number 2. That's your first game. And it's like, well, that's going to be the toughest draw, because if you take a look at the rest of the bracket, the bottom half looks a lot more, there's more paths that you can see for those teams. Like you can see a path for Penn State. You can see a path for Notre Dame, a path for Georgia. You can see those paths right there. Now, the Georgia one is a little bit more complicated because now you got the Carson Beck injury, and I believe it's a UCL injury. So that's a little bit more complicated. But, you got a couple weeks to prepare with Gunnar Stockton, the backup. That can help you out a little bit. But that is something noteworthy right there with Georgia. But the bottom half is a lot easier. The top half, a little bit more complicated because you got Ohio State, you got Tennessee, and then you got Texas in there. You got Arizona State, who's playing really solid football right now. They're going to have to face the winner of that Texas-Clemson game. That's going to be a tough matchup right there. So right away, the top half, it looks like it's a whole lot tougher for those teams than the bottom half of the bracket. It looks a whole lot more complicated for those teams. Now, the schedule as follows. I believe it's Penn State, SMU on Saturday. I believe Notre Dame, Indiana's on that Friday night. Then Penn State, SMU is at noon, which that's another thing. The scheduling, I find it really kind of head scratching because Penn State, SMU, I feel like would be it would be an awesome night game at Happy Valley playoff game. I feel like that would be awesome. I feel like, listen, Ohio State and Tennessee is going to be too at Columbus, but I feel like Happy Valley would be a little bit more amped up for that type of environment at night. So that's the noon game. Then Texas Clemson is the mid-afternoon game, and then Ohio State Tennessee, which Ohio State, they're probably like, well, we're glad we're not playing at noon because they've played so many noon games this year. And Tennessee's like, well, what else is new? We're playing a night game, when they've played mostly night games. So I find that kind of scheduling kind of a little bit complicated right there. But I will say the winner of that matchup going against Oregon, there's a whole lot of stuff that's compelling there, considering based off what we saw in the Pac-12 championship. Of course, you got the Ohio State rematch potential with Oregon, and that would be the Rose Bowl right there. So it's kind of the classic Rose Bowl setup, except it's instead of Pac-12 versus Big Ten, it's Big Ten versus Big Ten. So you got that storyline right there. And then you also got Tennessee right there, and which you had this team that's made this run over the course of the last 4 years. Which, listen, I'm just happy to talk about them real quick. I'm just happy that they've gotten to this point. I honestly feel, not to get too much into a preview of that Tennessee Ohio State game, but I feel like the pressure is completely on Ohio State. I think Tennessee is just like, fine, we'll suit up, we'll go play at Columbus. That's the hand we drew. So be it. Let's go up there. But I think a lot of that pressure is on Ohio State. But Tennessee, if they get to that point, I think they would have a pretty decent shot against Oregon. There's matchups there that you would like. So this playoff is really it's really interesting to see it now all settled down and finalized and seeing what we got here. And of course, again, that big thing was SMU versus Alabama and who's going to get in. So SMU ended up winning that one. They got a date with Penn State. And Penn State, I mean, Peter and I, we've been banging the table for Tennessee, Penn State. And I was really rooting for Penn State to get get blown out against Oregon. So the only way we're getting that game and live streaming that is if they make it to the championship. Penn State has a little bit of a better chance, but Tennessee, I mean, hey, all it takes, you got to get hot at the right time. And we'll have to see if that's going to be the case here. So this playoff is officially set. I'm really excited to see what's going to happen here in a couple weeks. It's going to be really fun to see these playoff games played at home stadiums and just kind of get the feel of it for the first time. It should be an exciting environment at all those schools. Texas is going to be rocking. I think Columbus will too. Penn State definitely will. Notre Dame will. Those are some good environments to have the first home playoff games. So that's where we're at right now. So again, that top half of the bracket, a lot more tough, I think. And the bottom half, you can start to see some paths here for those teams. So that's kind of where we're at with the playoff. And we'll see on December 20th when Notre Dame and Indiana gets us kicked off. We're going to see what transpires. And you take a look at those second round matchups. You have, again, Ohio State, Tennessee, potentially against Oregon. You have Arizona State potentially against Texas or Clemson. Penn State or SMU against Boise. And that would be that'd be a neutral site game right there. And then Notre Dame and Indiana against Georgia. And then you got the situation going on with Georgia. So exciting times. We finally got it set. And I know we're all ready to see what's going to happen here in a couple weeks as the postseason gets kicked off.